So the take-home messages, I suppose, from today, the second slide. Will I move them myself, Catherine? Or
no, I'm able to move them.
Yeah, okay, thank
Sorry.
you. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
So the take-home messages for today is that breast milk is the optimal first food for all babies, and that includes babies whose parents or mother has epilepsy. And that's really important to actually to know that anti-epileptic medications, as Sinead said, are generally safe for women with epilepsy, and women can breastfeed. So babies who are breastfeed have better neurodevelopmental outcomes, and this has been shown in a number of studies. One of them, the NOMED, I know, did one, and there was another one in Norway as well. People with epilepsy can breastfeed and care for their babies with the right help, support, and information. We can have the next slide. So human milk for human babies. So human milk has been shown to be the optimal first food for all babies. And certainly there are several organizations worldwide which recommend breastfeeding for the first 6 months and to continue with solid food until 2 years. And most professional neurology organizations around the world recommend that breastfeeding is recommend that women with epilepsy should be encouraged to breastfeed and provide them with the support, because human milk is tailor-made for human babies, and it's the best, most natural food for brain development. It's dynamic living substance that has a strong immune and anti-inflammatory response. It has the right number of sugar, fats, and proteins, and it is packed with specialist cells, enzymes, and numerous hormones, cancer-killing cells, and hormones that are very specific functions. It reduces infections, hospitalizations, sudden infant death syndrome, and also reduces the risk of diabetes and certain leukemias in children. For mothers, it reduces the risk of heart disease and cancer, and also has lower rates of postpartum depression. So human milk changes from birth to 2 weeks to 1 month, from morning until night. So it is really a constantly changing and dynamic substance. So formula is a nutrition, and there is no doubt about that, and it will provide nutrition, but it cannot be compared to human milk, because breast milk cannot be replicated in the same way that blood can't be replicated. So the next slide, please. I know that Sinead has done some facts around about medications. So I'm actually not going to dwell on all that, because Sinead did all of that really well. But most anti-epileptic medications are safe or moderately safe to use in breastfeeding. And the literature presents supporting data that breastfeeding does not have a negative impact on the neurodevelopment of a child. Sorry, I just want to... the ways that they transfer, so the ways that medication, so it's the amount of medication that is in a mother's blood is not necessarily the same that's in the mother's milk, because there are a lot of factors within the mom's blood that will actually prevent the drugs from actually transferring over to milk. And also there's factors within the baby as well that will block the full absorption of the drug into their system. So what is in the mother's blood is not necessarily in the mother's milk, and in fact probably more milk transfers to more drug transfers to the fetus than it does in breast milk. And yet women with epilepsy are often very concerned about whether their milk is safe to offer their babies. And the research would say that milk is safe to offer, that often it's at what they call subclinical levels, that it would not necessarily have an effect on the baby. There would be certain drugs for sure that affects the central nervous system, and that you would be always very conscious of the effect of those on the baby in terms of how they're feeding, their sleepiness and their alertness. So once in that, there's the valproate, I think again Sinead spoke about that. So I suppose the good news is, the next slide please, is that the AED concentrations in infant blood samples were significantly lower than the levels in maternal blood, which I've just said, as reported in the maternal outcome and for neurodevelopment effects of anti-epileptic drugs called the NOMED studies. And then in 2013, VB said continuous breastfeeding is associated with less impaired development at 6 months, 18 months, compared with babies who've received no breast milk or breastfed for less than 6 months. So I think really the message there is that it is safe and it is good to breastfeed if you wish to breastfeed. And if you do, that it is really, it should be supported, and that's for sure. The next slide, please. Oh, and this is just a slide around the different organizations that would be, including the HSC and the Green Top Guidelines, which is, again, Sinead referenced those from the Royal College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, and then the NICE guidelines are UK guidelines as well. And they all say that breastfeeding should be encouraged and women should be supported to breastfeed. So next slide, please. Thank you. So just some tips for managing, and again, Sinead would have referenced this as well, but taking medications as prescribed in even in labor and following birth. And anti-epileptic medications will probably be reduced after your baby is born at around 10 days if it has been raised in pregnancy to 2 weeks, and there's generally a plan in place. But again, that is something that you'd be probably asking your neurology team about. If you have memory difficulties around with your medication, certainly using breastfeeding apps can be really useful, and using alarms as a reminder to take your medications. So meds are often twice daily or daily, and they can be adjusted, that maybe if you're giving them just before a feed. So if you give them, if you take your medications just before a feed or just after a feed, sometimes that is the time that it's a good time to then feed your baby. But it's often the feed after your medication has been taken. So it might be a number of hours later that may be the time where you might want to supplement your baby. And again, that would depend on the nature of your baby and how responsive they are to the medications. Some people don't do that. Some people just breastfeed, and then some people do decide to supplement or to pump around the times of their medication. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just move on from this slide, because this Sinead has really brought through that really, really well. The postpartum concerns for women with epilepsy would be the effect of epilepsy on their baby, the effect of medications on the baby following birth, mental health and management of anxiety and other issues associated with epilepsy. And I think sleep deprivation is probably one of the most important concerns that women have. And coping, how women are coping on their own, how will they manage caring and for breastfeeding their baby when they are on their own. And some of these things I'm going to address today. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh yeah, so I'm going to address sleep first, because it's one of the greatest sources of anxiety. And women with epilepsy, because it can be a trigger for for some women with for seizures. So the perception of a full night's sleep is not 8 hours, and as Sinead said, it is 6 hours of unbroken sleep. And the quality of sleep is what's important. And probably people will be surprised to find out that if you breastfeed, you probably get more sleep at night. And in fact, one study has shown that people who breastfeed, provide feeding is going well and it's well, you know, that it is established that they are in the first 3 months, they're getting now 45 minutes more sleep than families who bottle feed. Now, I will say to you that probably the reason why is that when you bottle feed, you get up, you really wake up, you have the bottle prepared, or maybe you are preparing the bottle, and then you feed the baby. Okay, and then you're almost fully awake. But often in breastfeeding, sometimes the women are in just a very relaxed sort of state. if they get their baby quickly, following the cues for feeding, they can have the feeding done in a very short time, and both mother and baby tend to go back to sleep very, very quickly. Breastfeeding helps women to get back to sleep, and that's probably because of oxytocin. And oxytocin is released at great well, it's released for women as well who bottle feed, but particularly in breastfeeding, because it's what drives the milk. But also the beneficial effect is that some women can feel sleepy and very relaxed. There is a better quality of sleep as a result of breastfeeding, and there is a greater percentage of slow wave sleep, which is greater. And as I said, the total length of sleep is also marginally 45 minutes. But I personally feel, when I've been supporting women with epilepsy, I'm really talking about the quality of sleep. And certainly in the early days of feeding and of establishing, because I mean, breastfeeding, parenting, birthing for a first-time parent is incredibly transforming. And often we are so overwhelmed with it that I suppose the responsibility of breastfeeding rests on the mother, so that can feel quite really big for them. But once it's established, it can work really, really well. Can I have next slide, please? Yes. So just I want to say really briefly as well, to understand the nature of breastfeeding. That breastfeeding is a different energy and a different volume than a bottle feeding or formula feeding. So in the first day, in the first 24 hours, a baby's stomach is very, very tiny, and they would probably get in the first 24 hours between 35 and 50 mils. But by 6 weeks, by 4 to 6 weeks, they are probably producing about 1 litre of milk in a 24-hour period. Excuse me. So that growth from that day 1 to 6 weeks is exponential. And so that when by the time that 6 weeks is up, and you've got that litre of milk, or roughly 1 litre of milk made, that volume more or less does the baby until they're 6 months old. And that's hard to believe. And that's where that sort of, when I was talking about that breast milk changes, so the breast milk changes according to the baby's need for growth and development. And that's really important to understand that. So can I have next slide, please? So supporting lactation really begins before pregnancy. And this would be one thing that I would really encourage people to do, that if you are, and as Sinead has spoken about, advocating for yourself, doing your research and really knowing it is what you want, what is for best for you and for your baby. So if you're intending to breastfeed, I would let your neurology team know that, and so that you can prepare in that preconceptual time about your medications and seizure control. So that would be the first thing. The second thing then probably would be just to gather all your information and to have a one-to-one antenatal consultation with somebody who is like a lactation consultant in the hospital, or to have it done privately, where you can actually figure out what you need to feed your baby, and to understand how to manage sleep and nighttime feeding. So one of the things that I encourage all women to, when they are breastfeeding, would be to consider antenatal expression of their colostrum. So from about 36 weeks onwards, you can hand express colostrum from your breast, and you can store that and have that in your bag. You can freeze it and bring it into the hospital for when your baby's born. So that if your baby is sleepy in any way, and that is finding it really difficult to sort of, particularly after birth, if they're sleepy, they've had a long birth, and they've had other medications in birth like epidurals, well, maybe not pethidine, but certainly epidurals, they can be sleepy. So as a result of that, the colostrum is giving them, it really helps them with their sugar balance. It also gives them the right amount of volume for them, and it also as well, by getting it, it will encourage them to suck as well. So, and the other skill that you have is the skill of hand expression. And really, hand expression can become a really valuable tool in those early days of breastfeeding. I would encourage every woman to have a breastfeeding class, to attend breastfeeding classes, a group class to get to know what normal breastfeeding behavior is and what is normal newborn behavior. And that's sort of a really important thing to understand. I also, I suppose, because women with epilepsy often tend to maybe to pump and have an extra stash. They like to have an extra stash of milk for days that are maybe off or something like that. So I would certainly encourage you to research pumps so that the pump you need, or if you're going to exclusively pump and not breastfeed, would be different from the type of pump that you would use if you were maybe just pumping once or twice a day. I think I've got a slide next one on, yeah, so, oh, right, okay, I'll talk about pumps a bit more later on. But knowing as well what triggers your seizures can actually help women to have strategies. So if infections, lack of sleep, skipped meals, all of those things can knock women around. And they can, sometimes what women are saying that they just feel epileptic, they just don't feel right. And it's having strategies for those days. So I would be really encouraging people to gather family and gather friends, get food. The other thing is that there are professional services like doulas and night maternity nurses as well. And sometimes they can be very useful service for in those early days of feeding when you are those early days of feeding, when you're really just trying to, I suppose, establish things, feeling tired, and really sort of transitioning to parenting as well. Start building up your stash early, and that would be one of the things that I support women with epilepsy, is to actually, that if you're wanting to have a stash, start early. Can I have the next slide, please, Catherine? So this is what I was talking about. So there are different ways. There is pumps and there are milk collectors. So on the screen in front of you, as you look at it to your right, you're going to see a little a passive milk collector. And that can be just put on your breast just to gather up those small bits in the early part, in those early days of feeding. Pumping is not such, well, you can pump, but the colostrum is so rich, thick and runny that it can be more difficult to pump in those first 2 or 3 days, and probably hand expression certainly in the first day, and then moving to pumps could be a useful thing for people who are exclusively breastfeeding. The Haka, which is a silicone milk collector, that's the one on the left-hand side of your screen. It's a very cheap, and it works by suction. You put it onto your breast, and as you're feeding your baby on one breast, you can put this on the other, and the letdown in the breast that you're feeding on will actually start creating a letdown in the second breast as well. And there's certainly there's rules around using that, but women with epilepsy like to actually have a stash early. So if anybody tells you you shouldn't be actually pumping or collecting any milk in the early days, you need to tell them that things are different for you because you are trying to build up a small stash for nighttime feeding and whatever. So that is, and sometimes the best time to do that in those early days is in the morning time as well, where your volume can be that little bit, it's more, there's greater volume in the morning than there is in the evening. The breast milk of the evening it's a lower volume, but it's actually perfect for nighttime feeding. It's got a greater amount of that, and it was built for that, really. Next slide, please. So no, I said it already, but just knowing what normal newborn behavior is and creating small goals for yourself, manageable goals. With practice and experience, confidence grows, and then your goalposts can actually change. Some people start, as I said, collecting milk from the word go. Hand expression is probably easier, as I said, in the first few days. And then often women quite early on will decide to introduce a bottle at nighttime. So it's thinking about the nighttime options. So sometimes what women will do is they'll actually collect milk during the day, and then they'll decide that, okay, between 10 and 4 a.m., I'm not going to breastfeed, but I'm going to give my baby a bottle. So that's one option for that. And so a carer your partner can actually give your baby a bottle if your baby wakes up in that particular time. And then from 4 on, they will women will then breastfeed again. Another way that some people do it is, and I've talked to many women with around asking them what they did around epilepsy and feeding. And what some women did was their partner got up and brought the baby to them, and they fed the baby, and then they handed the baby back for changing, for burping, and for that sort of settling down. And sometimes what I'd say to parents is, rather than changing them, I would really avoid doing anything that's unnecessary at night. So if your baby is starting to show cues for feeding and early feeding cues, particularly for breastfeeding, I would be acting on those cues, because your baby is in a much more relaxed state and will probably come to the breast much easier, and it'll be more straightforward. If you're offering both breast at any one feeding, which generally we do, what we really want to do is you can change the nappy in between that, but I wouldn't be changing the nappy before they come to the breast. That's just a way of actually making the feeding a much easier much easier for the mother and for the baby, because sometimes by the time you change your nappy before a feed, the baby's gone from an early feeding cue to a late feeding cue, which is crying. So it's saying, I've given you the signals, I've told you I want something to eat, you didn't listen to this, and the next stage is crying. And when the babies are crying, their brain is just not in a sort of, I suppose, a relaxed state. It's not in a steady sort of, to have their, for the want of a better word, their ducks in a row for actually feeding, but they're more regulated when they're relaxed coming to the breast. This picture in this one here is a laid back position, and this would be another position that I would sort of really encourage parents who are feeding their babies as well to do this in bed, because it's very safe. It's also very relaxing for the mother. Somebody I know was asking about post-cesarean section and what to do post-cesarean section. I think a lot of help is needed around that. I'm supporting a woman at the moment, and really and truly there's very little sleep going on. And what I really encouraged her to do is to stay in the bed and to feed her baby on the side. So her partner is getting up and bringing her baby to them, and she's on her side doing sideline position. And her partner is keeping an eye on them both. And then he is taking the baby after the feed, doing a nappy change, and then settling the baby down to sleep. So that's one thing that can actually work. This is a really good feeding position for post-cesarean birth as well, because it is such a relaxing. When we're sitting up straight and we're holding our baby, all our tension is in our shoulders, and it can be just much more difficult for mother and for baby as well. Next slide, please. So often parents with epilepsy will do some combi feeding. So combi feeding is really about giving your baby a bottle at certain times. I've spoken already about offering volumes to your baby between certain times of the night. Sometimes people will choose formula, and that's okay for you, because every family makes decisions of what is right for you as a family, because you have to take so many things into consideration. You're taking how easy it is for you to make milk, how available your partner is for help, what other help is there available, and sometimes people, how your mental health is as well, and your emotional well-being is very important. And if really giving your baby a bottle of formula is going to actually help that whole area, that's a decision that's good for you as a family, and that's really, really important to always keep that in mind. So don't be looking at what other families are doing. Don't be thinking about this ideal sort of, life that's been maybe put up on Instagram or something like that. Think of what you need for yourself as a family to sort of to be at ease, really, because it is a massive transition. So all parents that I would talk to around feed, they all want to have a standby stash for if they have a bad day. And that's where collecting milk and breastfeeding sort of comes in. So most parents topped up in the early days. Some of them transitioned to full breastfeeding, and some of them continued to actually combi feed, and that's what worked for them. Some situations may call for complete replacement of breastfeeding, and that might be temporary because maybe the mother is sick, and that's actually okay as well. And you know, you can come back from these situations as well. You may not come back to a full, I suppose, plan that you had, but you can come back to situations again with that right one-to-one support. I think it's really important that you have got really good support for you, yourself, and for your situation. Next slide, please. So positions that are restful and restorative and are suitable for nighttime feeding. This is another one as well, that the mum is slightly laying back on the in the chair actually, the sideline position, and as I said, the laid back position. Supplementing, if you are supplementing, you're supplementing the right amount of milk for your baby's age. So what a baby is taking at 1 day and at 1 week are two different. Are you supplementing? Are you topping up a feed, or are you replacing a feed? Because those amounts are actually different as well. But from when a baby is about 4 weeks old, they're probably taking between 90 and 120 to replace 120 mils to replace a feed. If you're topping up, you're probably just topping up maybe with about 30 to 45 mils of feed. But that really all depends on how much milk you have and how well your baby is actually doing with breastfeeding. My own experience of feeding, so of working with women with epilepsy, is they seem to have had an abundance of milk. And I'd love to do some research on it. I just don't know if it's the medications are changing their prolactin levels, but they all seem to have a lot of milk. Or else they were, or else it may have been that they were pumping. So they were almost creating an oversupply because they were pumping as well as feeding to build up that stash. But there seemed to be an abundance of milk, which I think is really good for parents when they are feeding their babies, because you know, it's that transition to parenting and breastfeeding and, you know, managing your epilepsy, I think is all tricky. And then to have another challenge of breastfeeding, like having a low milk supply, can be really, really hard. But remember that babies their babies' tummies are very tiny. They have small volumes. They're much smaller than what you would see if you saw on a tin of formula. There are really probably babies who are formula fed tend to get 60 to 70% more volume than a breastfed baby. And it's got to do with the baby suck, to be honest with you. So babies are sucking at the breast, but when you're giving a baby a bottle, they're taking a volume and they're taking it from the beginning to the end at the same rate. Whereas in breastfeeding, the flow of milk actually changes. So it's quite strong at the beginning, and then towards the end of the feed, it is quite slow and a quite low flow. And it's that sort of sucking that actually is really lovely for the babies in terms of helping them to get asleep. So babies like to suck because it's soothing and it helps them to get asleep. And it's also for feeding as well. Whereas the bottle, they could have 10 or 20 mils taken from a bottle very, very quickly, and yet they're not finished sucking. And that's where probably soothers come in. So I talked about pumping before. Oh, this is the newborn, sorry. Are you all right there, Catherine?
Sorry, I just moved something by accident. Apologies.
That's okay, that's okay. Am I okay for time?
We are at 8:05, so maybe another 5 minutes. Would that be okay, Pauline?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So pumping, as I've talked about pumping just before your meds or immediately after your meds. When you're thinking about volumes, think that, is this a top-up or replacement? Very rarely do people have to pump and dump. And I would really, really, I think, carry that with you, that really it is so rare that you would have to pump and dump, and have the right pump for the right situation. I think the next slide shows, I think, the size of the baby's stomach. Is it the one? Yeah. So this is the very size of newborn stomach and the volumes that they might be taking. So on day one, you're talking about a teaspoon, really, about five to 7 teaspoons in the day. On day two, you're talking about maybe between 20 and 30 mils that they're taking in a feed. in a day. Then by 1 week, they're probably taking for a feed between 45 and 60 mils, but by 1 month, it can be anything from 80 to 150. Now, 150 is really a large volume, and it's more likely to be 120. And we generally say between that it's roughly about an ounce per hour between your feeds. So if it's going to be 4 hours between your feeds, that's 120. That's roughly it. The next slide, please.
Sorry, Pauline, hang on now. I'm going
That's
a bit. Is this
Oh,
correct?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay. That's perfect. Yeah. So I actually just put out a post on one of the Facebook groups to ask if there were any women with epilepsy who had breastfed, and I got about 5 respondents to them. So I actually rang them with their permission, and we spoke about their experience of breastfeeding. And this was this really helped me to inform a blog post that I did on epilepsy and breastfeeding. So I'm just putting these up as just things that they said. I cried going home because I felt I had no support. I think this woman actually was one of the women who said that a lactation consultant came into the ward and she was the only person that the lactation didn't see, because they assumed that she wouldn't be breastfeeding because she had epilepsy, and it really, really upset her. So I think that's, it goes back to Sinead's talk when she talked about, advocating for yourself. If I felt weird or off, I put him in the crib and I called somebody to mind him and be around so that I wasn't alone. So she had a strategy, which I thought was really good. This woman as well had, her partner used to get out of and bring the baby to her and take the baby when, and she just fed. And she was a woman who could actually go back to sleep. Going off to sleep for her was never really a massive issue. No one told me not to breastfeed, so we just went ahead and did it. Not breastfeeding was not going to make my life any easier. I was surprised that I managed. I didn't think too much about it because I could fall back asleep quite easily, and I reckon I was just in mom mode. Make life as easy as possible for yourself was this woman's advice, and your baby. Keep life simple and don't look at what other people can do. Look at what you can do. And I just thought they were just things to maybe, I think, end on. I'm not sure. What's the next slide, Catherine? I forget. Oh yeah, I think, I don't know if Sinead had said this, but depending on the day and the seizure types, it may be safer to actually sleep on the floor. I think feeding on the bed is a good place to be as well. And some chairs are okay. It really does depend on it. Changing on the floor, changing a baby on the floor, but it's not always necessary, because I think everybody's seizures are very different. Initially, I wouldn't bath your baby alone, and I know that as a couple of women, I were concerned about bathing their baby. And anyway, you don't have to bath your baby every day by any means. Topping and tailing is perfectly good. If you're feeling epileptic, have a space in the room to put your baby down. Slings can be very useful, but once again, it really depends on the type of seizures that you have, because sometimes if a drop can be different, or if you're going to fall, so it can be very but for maybe certain types of other seizures, where if there's myoclonic jerks in the arm, that the sling can be quite safe. Some families use strollers, but the thing is, and these are all safety information, but the reality is your baby needs contact with you, and really it's often you that they absolutely want. So it's really important not to be afraid to hold your baby and care for your baby and love your baby and have your baby on your chest. And I'm sure whoever's going to speak, I think it's Nicole, will speak about this too as well. Resting with your infant, these are just pictorial ways of just resting with your infant, which are also really restorative. Rest in breastfeeding is really, it can be a 20-minute nap, can be absolutely very, very restorative and can build towards your, you know, your energy for the next couple of hours. Next slide. Oh yeah, there's no reason to believe that breastfeeding will be any less successful because you have epilepsy. That's how I'd like to end it. And these, find your village is the other thing I'd say to you as well.